As many Commodore drivers know, you only have two speeds, fast and stop. So if you don't want to lose one of those speeds, you need to learn how to take care of your brakes. That's exactly what we're going to be doing today. Before we get started, we're going to need some tools and equipment. For the tools, we have a breaker bar, a torque wrench, a 12, 15 and 19mm socket, a 16 and 18mm spanner, a piston spreader, as well as a car jack and jack stands. Everything else, we will need some rope, brake grease, copper grease, rags and gloves, a thread locker, a syringe, as well as our new brake pads. With everything gathered, we can get started. First up, we'll need a car to work on, and I'll be working on my 2006 VZ Commodore. Before jacking up the car, I'll loosen the wheel nuts with a breaker bar. On most Commodores, it's just a 19mm socket, but in some cases like mine, it will be a random socket. I'll do the other side too, then chock off the back wheels with a block of wood so that it doesn't roll away. It's then time to jack up the car, and as I'm doing the front first, it's best to jack up on the K-frame underneath the engine. But my jack isn't the best, so after a few attempts of a couple of angles, I just have to jack up from the side. Just remember, when jacking out the car, to only lift from structural points and not from places like the floor pan, the oil pan or other silly places. When the car is high enough in the air, place a jack stand under the support, being sure not to fully climb under the car. I'll then do the same on the other side. I'll then just place the jack under the K-frame as a backup, but it won't be taking any weight. I'll then give it a little shake just to make sure it's fully supported. Grab a ratchet and remove all the wheel nuts from the tyre. Pop the wheel off, and then it's a good idea to place the tyre under the car for extra safety. You can then turn the steering all the way to the right to gain better access to the caliper. To open up the caliper, we'll need to remove this bolt back here, which is a 12mm, but you'll also need to hold this nut here, which is an 18mm. The caliper will then lift upwards with a bit of force, and this can be held in place with a bit of rope so it doesn't get in the way. Removing the brake pads now, and take a look at that, they have absolutely bugger all left on them, especially when comparing them to a new brake pad. The pin at the bottom will need to be removed and the grease wiped away from it before adding some new grease. Test that the pin moves smoothly in and out. We can then do the same thing at the top of the caliper, but this time the whole body moves. You'll need to use a piston spreader to push the piston back. Place an old brake pad in and turn the bolt. The front is a dual piston setup, so you need to do this on both the pistons. When pushing the pistons back, the fluid is going into the reservoir, and this will make the system have too much, so we'll just have to drain some out later on. I'll put some copper grease on the metal parts that the pads run along, and this is to reduce brake noise. Just make sure that you don't get any on the rotors. We can finally put in the new pads and then lower the caliper, but making sure that the anti-rattle strip is facing the right way. Lower the caliper back down and add a bit of blue thread locker to this belt before tightening it back up. The last few steps are to head inside the car and push down the brake pedal a couple times just to push the fluid in and to firm up the brakes. We can then spin the wheels back round and reattach the tyre. And because we always replace brakes in pairs, we can now do the exact same thing on the other side.
Alright, time to drop it down.
With the front done, we can lower the car off the jack stands and go work on the back. I'll crack the nuts on the back wheels one way or another, then I'll chuck up the front wheels and get to jacking. I'd really like to jack up on the diff housing, but once again my jack really won't let me do that, so I'll have to go from the side again. Not ideal as it increases sideways movement, but it's the best option I have. Same rule applies as the front though, don't jack up anywhere stupid and always use jack stands. With the jack resting under the diff, I'll remove the wheel and it's the same thing as before by throwing it under the car. The back brakes are almost identical to the fronts apart from a few small differences. The bolt here changes to a 15mm socket and a 16mm spanner, as well as this is a single piston setup as opposed to a dual piston setup on the front. We can then place an old pad inside and push the piston back to allow more room, but I apparently forgot to hit record, so you'll just have to use your imagination. I'll then apply some grease on the pins just like I did at the front, as well as to grease up the metal parts too. The pads go in next and they are a bit small on the fronts and need to make sure that the springs are lined up correctly while closing the caliper. A bit of blue thread locker on the bolt and then it's all done and we can put the wheel back on and repeat on the opposite side. The car is lower back on the ground, but the fun's not over yet. We'll head under the bonnet and take a look at the brake fluid. If your brakes were as worn as what mine were, then the reservoir will just about be overflowing, and we can suck up the excess with a syringe and dispose of it correctly. After that's all done, make sure you go around and torque all the wheel nuts down to 110 Nm, then go out and test the brakes. So that's how you replace your brake pads on your Commodore. It's really not that hard and you can save yourself hundreds by doing it yourself. If you like this video, perhaps you like some of my other Commodore ones, such as replacing a head unit, changing the spark plugs, and adding in gauges. So be sure to check out the playlist in the description. So thanks for stopping by, and bye for now.